A little girl whispers, "There's a door behind the mirror." The millionaire opens it and freezes. Before anything else, like this video if you believe in the strength of a kind soul. Enjoy the story. 3 days later, Harper had claimed the library as her favorite room. While Silas worked in his study, surrounded by spreadsheets and investment reports, and the construction crew updated the kitchen with modern appliances that seemed strangely out of place in the century-old house, she'd curl up in the big leather chair and lose herself in stories about children who were brave enough to save the day. The chair was massive, clearly built for adults, but Harper had discovered that if she pulled her knees up and tucked herself into the corner, it became the perfect hiding spot, somewhere she could observe without being observed. Mrs. Eloise Maddox had become her favorite person in the house almost immediately. At 70, she moved with the careful grace of someone who had spent decades keeping important things safe. Her silver hair was always perfectly pinned in a style that belonged to an earlier era, and her eyes held the kind of warmth that made Harper feel like she belonged somewhere for the first time in her memory. Unlike the social workers and foster parents who had moved through Harper's life with professional kindness, Mrs. Maddox looked at her as if she genuinely mattered, as if her thoughts and feelings were worth hearing. "The Bennett family has lived here for over 100 years, Mrs. Maddox was explaining as she dusted the tall mirror that dominated the far wall of the library. Her movements were methodical, reverent, the way someone might tend to a shrine. "Your new father's great-great-grandfather built this room specifically for his book collection. He was quite the scholar, from what I understand. Loved first editions and rare manuscripts. Some of these books haven't been opened in decades." The mirror itself was remarkable, nearly 8 feet tall and framed in carved mahogany that depicted intricate scenes of birds and flowers. Harper had been fascinated by it since her first day in the library. The way it seemed to watch everything that happened in the room, reflecting not just images, but somehow capturing the very essence of the space. Sometimes, when the afternoon light hit it just right, she could swear she saw shadows moving in its depths that didn't match the shadows in the room. Harper was only half listening to Mrs. Maddox's historical lecture. She was playing a private game of hide-and-seek, imagining where she would hide if she needed to disappear quickly. It was an old habit from her orphanage days, when knowing the escape routes had sometimes meant the difference between safety and trouble. The heavy curtains that hung beside the tall windows, the space behind the antique globe that stood on its own pedestal, the narrow gap between 2 bookcases that seemed designed for someone exactly her size. That's when she heard a click, a soft mechanical sound that seemed to come from inside the wall itself, from somewhere behind the mirror. Harper's head snapped up, her game forgotten. Mrs. Maddox was still talking about leather-bound first editions and the importance of proper book preservation, but Harper's entire focus had narrowed to that one spot behind the mirror. Her senses suddenly sharp with the kind of alertness that had kept her safe in uncertain situations. Click. There it was again, deliberate, intentional, like a lock turning or a latch being released. Not the random settling sounds that old houses made, but something purposeful, something that suggested hidden mechanisms and secret purposes. Harper slipped from her chair and approached the mirror, her bare feet silent on the Persian rug. Her reflection looked small and uncertain against the ornate frame, her light brown curls catching the afternoon light that streamed through the tall windows, but her eyes were bright with curiosity and something else, a growing certainty that she was on the verge of discovering something important. She pressed her ear to the glass, feeling the cool surface against her skin, then to the wall beside it, where the sound seemed to originate. Click, click. The sounds were definitely coming from behind the wall, rhythmic and deliberate. Harper's heart began to race with excitement and a little fear. In her experience, hidden things were usually hidden for good reasons. "Mrs. Maddox," Harper whispered, not wanting to break whatever spell was happening, afraid that speaking too loudly might make the sound stop. "Yes, dear. Can mirrors have doors behind them?" The older woman's face went pale, all the color draining from her cheeks as if Harper had said something terrible. The dust cloth fell from her hands and fluttered to the floor like a wounded bird. "What did you say?" "I heard clicking, like a door opening and closing, or maybe a lock." Mrs. Maddox set down her cleaning supplies with shaking hands, her movements suddenly uncertain. "Harper, I think you should." "Harper." Silas's voice boomed from the doorway, cutting through the afternoon quiet like a thunder crack. He'd clearly been running, his perfect composure finally cracked, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. His tie was askew, and there was something in his eyes that Harper had never seen before, genuine panic. "What are you doing?" "There's something behind the mirror," Harper said, her voice small but certain, carrying the conviction of someone who had learned to trust her instincts above all else. "I heard it clicking." Silas looked at Mrs. Maddox, who nodded slowly, her face grave. "She's right, Mr. Bennet. The child has sharp ears." For a long moment, nobody moved. The library felt frozen in time, dust motes suspended in the afternoon light, the air itself holding its breath. Then Silas walked slowly to the mirror, his businessman's confidence replaced by something Harper had never seen before, genuine fear mixed with a terrible kind of recognition. "Help me move this," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Together, he and Mrs. Maddox carefully lifted the heavy mirror away from the wall. It took both of them working in careful coordination, the mirror clearly much heavier than it appeared. Harper held her breath as they set it aside, revealing what lay behind. Harper gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Behind the mirror was a wooden door, old and worn, crafted from dark wood that had aged to the color of midnight. It had an antique brass handle that caught the light and looked like it had been turned recently. There were no cobwebs, no dust, just the dull gleam of metal that had seen recent use. The wood around the lock was lighter than the rest, as if someone had been working to keep it functional, oiling hinges and cleaning mechanisms. This wasn't some forgotten relic. This was a door that someone had been maintaining. Silas stared at the door, his face white as paper. "This isn't on any of the house plans." "No, sir," Mrs. Maddox said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of years of unspoken knowledge. "It wouldn't be." Harper stepped closer, her heart pounding with excitement and terror in equal measure. She'd found her first real secret, and from the look on Silas's face, the fear in Mrs. Maddox's eyes, it was bigger and more dangerous than she'd imagined. "There's a door behind the mirror," she whispered, just as she had in her dreams for the past 3 nights. The morning mist clung to the windows of the Bennet mansion like whispered secrets, refusing to let go. Harper Lane pressed her small face against the cold glass, watching droplets race each other down the pane. At 9 years old, she had learned that big houses held big secrets, and this house felt heavier with them than most. The Victorian structure loomed around her like a sleeping giant, its corridors stretching endlessly in directions she hadn't yet explored, its rooms filled with furniture covered in white sheets that looked like ghosts in the dim morning light. "Harper, breakfast," called Silas Bennet from somewhere in the vast hallway below. His voice echoed differently here than it had in the city apartment where they'd first met at the adoption agency 3 months ago. There, his voice had been careful, measured, like a businessman negotiating the most important deal of his life. Here, even his words seemed to get lost among the shadows and high ceilings, swallowed by the weight of generations of Bennet family history. Harper traced a finger along the windowsill, feeling the way the old wood had worn smooth under countless other hands. She wondered about those hands, who they belonged to, what stories they carried, what secrets they had touched. The orphanage had taught her to listen carefully, to notice the things adults thought children couldn't see or understand. She had learned to read the subtle signs that meant someone was lying or hiding something or about to disappear from her life forever. And this house was practically shouting things that grown-ups pretended not to hear. The wallpaper in her new bedroom told stories of roses that had faded to the color of old blood. The floorboards sang different songs under her feet, some welcoming, others warning. Even the air itself felt thick with unspoken words, as if centuries of conversations had settled into the very walls and were waiting for someone young enough, brave enough, to hear them. Silas appeared in the doorway, his tie already perfectly knotted despite the early hour. He looked like the millionaire he was, composed, rational, every detail under control. His dark hair was graying at the temples in a way that made him look distinguished rather than old, and his suits always fit him perfectly, as if even his clothes understood their place in his carefully ordered world. But Harper had started to notice the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, as if he was still surprised to find her there, still uncertain whether this strange new arrangement of theirs would actually work. "You're going to love the library," he said, straightening his cufflinks with the same precise movements he made every morning. "Mrs. Maddox has been organizing it for weeks. She's excited to show you the old books. Some of them are first editions, worth more than most people make in a year." Harper nodded, but her attention was already drifting to the sounds the house made when it thought no one was listening, creaks that didn't match footsteps, whispers that couldn't quite be wind, the settling sounds that old houses made, but somehow more deliberate, more intentional. And something else, something that made her skin prickle with the same feeling she'd had right before the fire alarm went off at the orphanage last year, that sense that something was wrong even when everyone else seemed perfectly calm. "Silas?" she asked quietly, her voice small in the grand space. "Yes, sweetheart." The endearment still felt new on his tongue, and Harper could hear him trying it out, testing whether it fit. At the adoption agency, he had called her Harper, then Mississippi Lane with formal politeness. Now he was attempting the language of fatherhood, one careful word at a time. "Do houses have memories?" He paused, his hand freezing on his briefcase handle. For a moment, his careful composure slipped, and Harper saw something flicker across his face, uncertainty, maybe even fear. It was the first time she had seen him look truly unsure of himself, and it made something cold settle in her stomach. "What makes you ask that, honey? This one feels like it's trying to tell me something, like it's been waiting a long time for someone to listen." The door remained unopened for 2 days. Silas had called his lawyers, his construction foreman, even the county records office, but no one could explain why there was an undocumented door in his library. He'd taken to pacing the halls at night, and Harper could hear his footsteps from her bedroom, a restless rhythm that spoke of a man wrestling with questions he couldn't answer. During the day, he threw himself into work with even more intensity than usual. Harper would watch him through the crack in his study door, surrounded by architectural plans and legal documents, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in rapid, clipped sentences to people who couldn't give him the answers he needed. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched when he thought no one was looking. This was a man accustomed to having control over every detail of his life, and the hidden door had shattered that illusion of mastery. She was getting good at listening, really listening, the way her time in the foster system had taught her. The house had so many voices once you knew how to hear them, the grandfather clock in the main hallway that chimed 1 minute early, as if it was eager to mark time's passage, the floorboard in the upstairs hallway that squeaked when anyone heavier than Harper walked on it, positioned just outside Silas's bedroom door like an early warning system. The radiators that clanked and hissed their own mysterious conversations throughout the night. And now, the soft sounds of someone moving around downstairs when everyone was supposed to be asleep. Harper had learned to distinguish between the normal settling sounds of an old house and the deliberate footsteps of someone who didn't want to be heard. These were careful movements, measured and purposeful, someone who knew the house well enough to avoid the creaky spots, who understood which doors would groan and which would open silently. On Thursday evening, Harper was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Maddox prepare dinner when Vanessa Quinn arrived. She was beautiful in the way that made Harper think of movie stars, the kind of perfect that seemed almost artificial. Her blonde hair fell in perfectly straight lines to her shoulders, never seeming to move out of place even in the wind. Her clothes looked expensive, even to a 9-year-old who had learned to recognize the difference between quality and pretense, and her smile seemed painted on, the kind of expression that never quite reached her eyes. "Silas!" Vanessa called out as she swept into the kitchen, her heels clicking against the tile in a staccato rhythm that somehow managed to sound both confident and predatory. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to check on the progress upstairs." Harper watched as Silas's entire demeanor changed the moment Vanessa entered the room. His shoulders relaxed, and that careful business smile spread across his face, the same expression he wore during important phone calls and client meetings. Around Vanessa, he looked like he was trying to be someone else, someone more charming and carefree than the serious, methodical man Harper was getting to know. Of course, let me show you what the crew finished today. They disappeared upstairs, leaving Harper with Mrs. Maddox, who was stirring soup with considerably more force than the task required. The older woman's mouth was pressed into a thin line of disapproval, and Harper could sense waves of tension radiating from her usually calm presence. "She comes by a lot," Harper observed, testing the waters. "Too much," Mrs. Maddox muttered under her breath, then caught herself. "I mean, she's very dedicated to her work." Harper was about to ask what she meant when Vanessa's voice drifted down from the upper floor. She was on her phone, and she clearly thought she was alone, out of earshot of the kitchen. But Harper had learned to pay attention to conversations that adults didn't think children could hear, and the house's acoustics carried sound in unexpected ways. "Just a few more nights," Vanessa was saying, her voice different now, sharper, more focused, stripped of the warm professionalism she displayed around Silas. "The safe will be yours by the end of the week. I guarantee it." Harper's stomach dropped like a stone. She looked at Mrs. Maddox, who had gone very still, her wooden spoon frozen mid-stir. "I'm being careful," Vanessa continued, her voice growing more confident. "He trusts me completely. The renovation gives me perfect access to every room in the house. The kid is the only wild card, but she's just a kid. Nobody listens to orphans anyway. They're too damaged, too desperate for attention to be credible." The words hit Harper like ice water, each syllable a familiar wound reopened. Nobody listens to orphans. She'd heard variations of that sentiment before, in different words, in different places: social workers who dismissed her concerns about foster families, teachers who assumed her problems were emotional rather than real, adults who thought children's voices didn't matter, especially children who came from broken places. But hearing it from Vanessa, spoken with such casual cruelty, made Harper's hands shake with a mixture of anger and determination. She might be just a kid, and she might be an orphan, but she had learned to see things that adults missed. And right now, she was seeing something very important indeed. When Silas and Vanessa came back downstairs, Harper was quiet through dinner. She watched Vanessa laugh at Silas's jokes, her laughter like wind chimes, pretty but somehow hollow. She watched the way Vanessa touched his hand when she made a point, her fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. She watched that perfect smile and those calculating eyes that never stopped moving around the room, cataloging, measuring, planning. Vanessa complimented Mrs. Maddox on the soup, praised the renovation progress, and asked seemingly innocent questions about the house's history and valuable items. But now Harper could see what adults missed. The way Vanessa's questions were too specific, too focused on certain topics. She wanted to know about safes, about valuable collections, about rooms that might contain things worth stealing. After Vanessa left, Harper found Silas in his study, surrounded by papers and investment reports. The room smelled of leather and coffee, and the desk lamp cast a warm circle of light that made everything beyond it seem shadowy and uncertain. "I need to tell you something," she said carefully, approaching his desk like she might approach a nervous animal. "What is it, sweetheart?" He looked up from his papers, his expression patient but distracted, his mind clearly still occupied with business matters. "I heard Vanessa on the phone. She said something about a safe." Silas set down his pen and gave her his full attention, but his expression was patient rather than concerned. "Harper, adults have lots of phone conversations about business things. Sometimes they can sound more serious than they are when you only hear part of the conversation." She said, "Nobody listens to orphans anyway." For a moment, something flickered in Silas's eyes, surprise, maybe even anger. But then he smiled and patted her shoulder in a gesture that was meant to be reassuring, but felt dismissive. "I think you might have misheard, honey. Vanessa likes you. She's been very supportive of our family. But I heard her say." "Harp," his voice was gentle but firm, the tone adults used when they wanted to end a conversation without seeming cruel. Sometimes, when we're adjusting to new situations, our imagination can run away with us. Vanessa is helping us renovate our home. She's not plotting anything. Later that night, Harper lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. The house was making its nighttime sounds again, but now they felt different, more urgent, like it was trying to warn her about something, like the walls themselves were holding secrets that needed to be told. She thought about the door behind the mirror, still sealed and mysterious, about Vanessa's phone call and the dismissive way Silas had brushed off her concerns, about the way Mrs. Maddox had gone quiet when she'd mentioned the safe. And she made a decision. Tomorrow, she was going to start listening even more carefully because, if adults wouldn't believe her words, she would have to find proof they couldn't ignore. The house settled around her with a sound like a deep breath, and Harper felt certain that she wasn't the only one keeping secrets. The difference was, she intended to expose them. The next morning, Harper found Mrs. Maddox in the library, staring at the exposed door with troubled eyes. "You believe me, don't you?" Harper asked quietly. Mrs. Maddox looked down at her with sad understanding. "I've worked for the Bennett family for 37 years, dear. I've learned that this house keeps its own counsel. Will you help me figure out what's behind the door?" The older woman was quiet for a long time. Then she walked to a specific section of the bookshelves and pulled out what looked like a photo album. But when she opened it, Harper saw it was full of old papers, blueprints, letters, and photographs yellowed with age. "These are the original house plans," Mrs. Maddox said softly. "I've been the keeper of Bennett family documents since before your father was born." Harper studied the blueprints. Even at 9, she could see that the current library didn't match what was drawn on the old papers. According to these plans, there should be a staircase leading down from where the mirror had hung. "Where do the stairs go?" Harper asked. Mrs. Maddox pointed to a section of the blueprint labeled in faded ink. Harper sounded out the words slowly: "Underground storage, private vault." "A safe," Harper whispered. Vanessa was talking about a safe. "What?" Mrs. Maddox's voice was sharp. Harper told her about the phone conversation. Mrs. Maddox listened with growing alarm, her hands gripping the old documents. "We need to tell Silas," she said finally. But when they found him, he was with Vanessa in the main hallway, reviewing contractor schedules. Harper took a deep breath and approached them. "Silas, can I show you something in the library?" "Not right now, honey. Vanessa and I are working. It's about the door and the safe." Vanessa's head snapped up. For just a moment, her perfect mask slipped, and Harper saw something cold and calculating flash across her face. Then she smiled. "A safe? How exciting. Maybe there's buried treasure." Her tone was light, but Harper noticed she'd moved closer to Silas, her hand on his arm. "What safe?" Silas asked. Harper showed him the blueprints, explaining what she and Mrs. Maddox had discovered. But as she talked, she could see his attention split between her words and Vanessa's subtle interruptions. "Children have such wonderful imaginations," Vanessa said with a laugh. "But honestly, Silas, shouldn't we focus on the actual renovation?" "Harper," Silas said gently, "I appreciate your curiosity, but I'm not making it up." Harper's voice cracked with frustration. "Mrs. Maddox has the real blueprints. There's supposed to be stairs behind that door." Mrs. Maddox stepped forward, her voice steady. "The child is right, Mr. Bennett. The plans clearly show." "Maybe we should open the door," Harper interrupted. "Just to see." Silas looked between Harper's pleading face and Vanessa's perfectly composed smile. Harper held her breath. "All right," he said finally. "Let's take a look." 20 minutes later, they had carefully removed the door from its hinges. Behind it was indeed a narrow stone staircase spiraling down into darkness. The air that wafted up smelled old and unused. Silas shone his flashlight down the stairs. "This is incredible. How did we not know about this?" Harper was already moving toward the stairs, but Silas caught her arm. Absolutely not. We don't know if it's safe. Then you go first, Harper said. But I'm coming with you. Vanessa had gone very quiet. Harper noticed she was standing back from the door, her earlier enthusiasm completely gone. Maybe we should call a structural engineer first, Vanessa suggested. These old staircases can be dangerous. But Silas was already starting down, his flashlight beam dancing off stone walls. Harper followed close behind, her heart pounding with excitement and fear. The staircase ended in a small underground room carved directly from the stone foundation of the house. It was empty except for an old wooden chest and something that made Harper's stomach lurch, dark stains on the stone floor that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Silas, Harper whispered, pointing. He crouched down, his face grave. This is old. Very old. He examined the wooden chest, which had a complex brass lock. But this chest has been opened recently. Look at the scratches around the keyhole. Harper studied the blood stains, her mind racing. Someone got hurt down here. A long time ago, Silas said, but his voice was uncertain. Behind them, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Vanessa appeared, her face carefully neutral. Find anything interesting? She asked. Harper watched Vanessa's eyes move quickly around the room, taking in every detail. When her gaze landed on the chest, Harper saw something she recognized from her orphanage days, the look of someone planning something they shouldn't. We should probably seal this back up, Vanessa said quickly, for safety. But Harper was no longer listening to the adults. She was listening to the house, and the house was practically screaming at her to pay attention. There was more here than blood and an empty chest. There was a story waiting to be told, and she was going to be the one to tell it. Every old house holds stories in its bones, but sometimes those stories are warnings, waiting for someone brave enough to read them. For 3 days after discovering the underground room, Harper watched and waited with the patience of someone who had learned that survival sometimes depended on perfect timing. She noticed how Vanessa found reasons to visit every day, always with some architectural detail to discuss with Silas, always with another excuse to walk through the house and examine its contents. She noticed how Vanessa's eyes lingered on the library, especially the area around the sealed door, with the calculating gaze of someone taking inventory. And she noticed how every time Harper tried to bring up the underground room or the strange phone conversation, Silas seemed distracted, his attention pulled away by business calls or Vanessa's perfectly timed interruptions. The pattern was becoming clear to Harper in a way that apparently escaped the adults around her. Vanessa was mapping the house, learning its rhythms, figuring out when people would be where. She asked casual questions about valuable items, about family heirlooms, about Silas's business schedule, all perfectly innocent inquiries from an architect. But Harper had learned to recognize the difference between curiosity and reconnaissance. Mr. Vernon Hale arrived on a Tuesday, carrying his black leather briefcase and wearing the kind of stern expression that made Harper want to hide behind Mrs. Maddox. At 75, he moved with the careful dignity of someone who had spent decades making decisions that other people didn't like. His silver hair was combed back in a style that suggested old money and older values. His suits were always perfectly pressed, his shoes always polished to a mirror shine, and his manner suggested that he considered most modern developments to be disappointing departures from proper tradition. Bennett, he said without preamble as he entered the study, setting his briefcase down with the kind of deliberate precision that made everything he did seem like a formal pronouncement. We need to discuss this archaeological adventure of yours. Harper was supposedly in the kitchen helping Mrs. Maddox with lunch preparation, but she'd positioned herself at the perfect angle to hear every word through the partially open door. She'd learned that adults often revealed their true thoughts when they believed children weren't listening. It's not an archaeological adventure, Vernon. It's my house, and I found a room that's not on any official plans. Silas's voice carried the edge of a man who was tired of explaining himself. Exactly my point. Mr. Vernon's tone was that of a professor lecturing a particularly slow student. Some things are left off official plans for good reasons, family reasons, private reasons, reasons that are none of the government's business. Harper crept closer to the doorway, her bare feet silent on the Persian runner that lined the hallway. The child has been filling your head with stories, Mr. Vernon continued, and Harper could hear the dismissive certainty in his voice. Children from difficult backgrounds often have overactive imaginations. They see drama where none exists because drama has been the constant in their lives. It's a coping mechanism, but it's not healthy to indulge it. Harper's face burned with a familiar shame and anger. She'd heard this particular dismissal before, this way that adults reduced her experiences to psychological problems, as if her time in foster care had somehow damaged her ability to perceive reality accurately, as if trauma made her voice worth less rather than teaching her to see things that comfortable people missed. Harper isn't making things up, Silas said, but his voice lacked the conviction Harper desperately needed to hear. Isn't she? First mysterious doors, now talk of safes and blood. Next, she'll be claiming the house is haunted. Mr. Vernon's laugh was dry and humorless. These children from the system, they're damaged goods, Silas. You can't expect them to adjust normally to stable environments. But there really was blood, Silas began. Old houses have old stains. Water damage, rust, iron oxide from old pipes, any number of perfectly mundane explanations. You're letting an unstable child's fantasies influence your perception of reality. Harper had heard enough. She marched into the study, her small frame vibrating with anger and determination, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I'm not making anything up, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart and the humiliation burning in her cheeks. And I heard Vanessa on the phone. She said something about a safe being hers by the end of the week. Mr. Vernon's eyebrows shot up in an expression of theatrical outrage. Young lady, it's very inappropriate to eavesdrop on adult conversations, and it's even more inappropriate to spread malicious rumors about people who are trying to help your family. I wasn't spreading rumors. I was telling the truth. Harper, Silas said gently, his voice carrying that particular tone of adult patience that Harper was learning to hate. Adults sometimes discuss business in ways that can sound confusing to children. Context matters. She said, nobody listens to orphans anyway. The room went dead silent. Harper watched both men's faces, saw Mr. Vernon's lips tighten with disapproval and something uncomfortable flicker across Silas's expression, the first real crack in his dismissive certainty. That's quite enough, Mr. Vernon said coldly, his voice dropping to the register he probably used in boardrooms to destroy people's careers. Silas, this child clearly has some serious adjustment issues that need professional attention. I can recommend several excellent child psychologists who specialize in trauma-related behavioral problems. She's been through a lot, Silas said quietly. All the more reason to seek appropriate help rather than indulging these elaborate fantasies. The child is clearly acting out, creating drama to get attention. It's textbook behavior for children who have been abandoned. Harper felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned long ago that crying only convinced adults that she was unstable, emotional, unreliable. Fine, don't believe me. But when your safe gets robbed, remember that a kid tried to warn you. She turned and ran from the room, Mr. Vernon's voice following her like a curse. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Children who have been abandoned often create elaborate stories to compensate for their feelings of powerlessness. It's a cry for help disguised as heroic fantasy. Harper fled to her bedroom and slammed the door hard enough to make the windows rattle. She threw herself on her bed, finally letting the tears come in great, angry sobs. It was just like every other time, adults who were supposed to protect her, deciding she was too damaged to be trusted, too broken to be believed. She was still crying when Mrs. Maddox knocked softly and entered with a tray of warm cookies and milk, her face kind and concerned. They don't believe me, Harper sobbed, her words muffled by her pillow. Mrs. Maddox sat on the edge of the bed, her voice gentle but firm. I believe you, dear heart. You do. I've been watching that young woman carefully since she started coming around. There's something about her that doesn't sit right with me. Too many questions about things that shouldn't concern an architect. What do you mean? She asks too many questions about family history, about valuable items in the house, about when people will be home and when they'll be away, and she's very interested in that library, especially areas that most renovation work wouldn't need to access. So, what do we do? Mrs. Maddox was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands smoothing Harper's hair with maternal tenderness. We keep watching. We trust each other. And we remember that truth has a way of revealing itself, no matter how many people try to bury it. That night, Harper lay awake, listening to the house with the heightened awareness of someone who had learned that safety depended on paying attention to things that others missed. Around midnight, she heard the soft creak of footsteps in the hallway below, not the random settling sounds that old houses made, but the deliberate movements of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Someone was moving around downstairs with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Harper slipped out of bed and crept to her bedroom door, her heart pounding with fear and excitement. The hallway was dark, but she could see a faint light coming from under the library door. Not the harsh brightness of electric lights, but the warm, focused glow of a flashlight. Her heart pounding, she tiptoed down the stairs, avoiding the boards she knew would creak, and pressed her ear to the library door. Inside, she could hear soft sounds, papers rustling, something metallic clicking, the whispered conversation of someone who thought they were completely alone, and then, very faintly, a woman's voice whispering into a phone. "I'm in. The chest is here, but I need more time with the lock mechanism." "Yes, I have the blueprints." "No, the child is sleeping." Harper's blood turned to ice. It was Vanessa, and she was talking about Harper as if she was just another obstacle to be managed. Harper spent the next day in agony, carrying the weight of knowledge that no one would believe. She tried to tell Silas about hearing Vanessa in the library, but he was distracted by urgent work calls and barely listened, his attention pulled away by the demands of his investment firm. When she told Mrs. Maddox, the older woman grew very worried, but insisted they needed concrete proof before making serious accusations against someone with Vanessa's professional standing and personal relationship with Silas. "No one will believe us without evidence," Mrs. Maddox said quietly, her voice heavy with the wisdom of someone who had seen how power and privilege could shield people from consequences. "Not after yesterday. Mr. Vernon has significant influence with your father, and he's already planted seeds of doubt about your credibility." The reality of her situation was becoming clear to Harper in a way that made her stomach twist with anxiety. She was a 9-year-old orphan with no evidence except her own testimony, going up against a beautiful, professional woman who had carefully cultivated Silas's trust and affection. In any contest of credibility, Harper would lose before she even began. That afternoon, Silas introduced Harper to Samir, a young tech specialist he'd hired to update the house's security system. He was a cheerful man in his 20s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the sort of easy manner that made Harper trust him immediately. Unlike the other adults in her life, he didn't talk down to her or treat her questions like inconveniences. "Harper's been having some concerns about strangers in the house," Silas explained, clearly trying to address her worries in what he thought was an appropriate way. "I thought having better security might help her feel safer." Harper recognized this as Silas's attempt to solve what he saw as her psychological problems through technology, but she decided to make the best of the opportunity. Samir seemed genuinely interested in making her feel secure, and she sensed that he might actually listen to her concerns. As he worked, installing motion sensors and updating electronic locks throughout the house, he explained what he was doing in terms that Harper could understand. "I'm creating a comprehensive security network," he said, showing Harper a tablet that displayed different rooms in the house as a series of interconnected diagrams. "This will monitor any unusual activity, track who enters and leaves each room, and alert us to anything that seems out of place." "Can it detect phones?" Harper asked, an idea beginning to form in her mind. "Phones? Sure, if they're connected to networks or Bluetooth devices. The system can identify any electronic device that's actively transmitting signals. Samir looked curious about her question. Why do you ask? Harper glanced around to make sure they were alone, then decided to take a calculated risk. Could you check the library? For any devices that shouldn't be there? Samir looked puzzled but seemed willing to humor her. He pulled up a different screen on his tablet, one that showed electronic signatures and signal patterns. Let me run a comprehensive scan for active electronic devices. They walked to the library together, Samir holding up his tablet like a technological divining rod. Harper watched the screen with fascination as it detected his own equipment, the house's Wi-Fi network, Silas's laptop in the next room, and something else. That's weird, Samir muttered, frowning at the screen in genuine confusion. What? There's a Bluetooth signal coming from somewhere in this room, but it's not connected to your house's network. It's like a hidden device that's operating independently. Harper's heart started racing with vindication and terror in equal measure. Where is it coming from? Samir moved around the room slowly, watching his tablet like a bloodhound following a scent. The signal grew stronger as he approached the wall where the mirror had hung, weaker when he moved away. It's strongest right here, he said, pointing to the sealed door with growing interest. But that doesn't make sense. What's behind this wall? A staircase, Harper said quickly, her words tumbling over each other in her excitement. There's a room downstairs with an old chest. Samir's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Can we check it out? 20 minutes later, they had reopened the door and descended into the underground room, Samir's tablet pinging frantically as they got closer to the source of the signal. Harper led him directly to the wooden chest, her instincts proven correct. There, she said, pointing to the chest with satisfaction. Check there. Samir examined the chest carefully with a small flashlight, his professional training evident in the systematic way he searched for anomalies. Look at this, he said, pointing to what looked like a tiny metal disc attached to the underside of the lock mechanism. That's a sophisticated Bluetooth scanner. Someone's been using it to remotely analyze the lock mechanism. Harper felt vindicated and terrified at the same time. She'd been right about Vanessa, but now the reality of what that meant was sinking in. Someone's trying to break into the chest. Not trying. Planning. Samir's voice was serious now, his casual demeanor replaced by professional concern. This device has been collecting data about the lock specifications for days, maybe weeks. Someone is methodically preparing to break into this chest without leaving physical evidence of tampering. Samir looked at Harper with new respect, seeing her not as a troubled child with an overactive imagination, but as someone who had uncovered something genuinely dangerous. How did you know to look for this? I heard someone down here at night. A woman on the phone, talking about combinations and timing. We need to tell your dad immediately. This is serious criminal activity. They found Silas in his study with Vanessa, reviewing architectural plans spread across his desk. Harper burst in, Samir close behind, her heart pounding with the knowledge that this confrontation would determine whether she would finally be believed or dismissed once and for all. Silas, we found a scanner on the chest downstairs, Harper said breathlessly. Someone's been trying to break in electronically. Vanessa's face went carefully blank, but Harper caught the microsecond of panic that flashed across her features before the beautiful mask returned. A scanner? How exciting. Like something out of a spy movie. But Samir was already pulling up evidence on his tablet, his professional credibility lending weight to Harper's accusations. Mr. Bennett, someone has placed a sophisticated Bluetooth device on your property. It's been actively gathering data about a lock mechanism for what appears to be several days. Silas stared at the screen, his business mind clearly racing through the implications. That's not possible. Only a few people have access to this house. Harper watched Vanessa carefully. The beautiful woman's composure was perfect, but Harper noticed her hands were clenched in her lap, her knuckles white with tension. Who would have the technical knowledge to do something like this? Silas asked, his voice taking on the hard edge he used in difficult business negotiations. Someone with regular access to the house, Samir said grimly. Someone who could install it without being detected and monitor its progress remotely. Harper took a deep breath, knowing this was her moment. I heard Vanessa on the phone last night. She said, I'm in. The chest is here, but I need the combination. The room went dead silent. Vanessa's perfect smile froze like ice. That's impossible, she said smoothly, but her voice had lost some of its warmth. I wasn't here last night. Yes, you were, Harper said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. I heard you in the library around midnight. You were talking about me, about how nobody listens to kids. Silas looked between Harper and Vanessa, confusion and growing suspicion warring on his face. Harper could see him trying to reconcile the evidence with his feelings, his rational mind fighting against his attraction to the woman who had so carefully cultivated his trust. Silas, Vanessa said, her voice hurt and vulnerable, playing the victim with practiced skill. Surely you don't believe I would do something like this after everything we've built together. The device is real, Samir interrupted, holding up his tablet with scientific certainty. And it's been active for several days. This isn't a child's imagination. This is hard evidence of criminal intent. Harper watched as the truth began to dawn on Silas's face. The careful, controlled businessman was seeing his world shift beneath him, recognizing that his judgment had been compromised by manipulation and charm. Vanessa, he said quietly, his voice carrying the finality of a door closing, I think you need to leave. For just a moment, Vanessa's mask slipped completely. Harper saw a cold fury flash across her face, the real woman beneath the beautiful facade, calculating, angry, and dangerous. Then the perfect smile returned, but it no longer reached her eyes. Of course, Vanessa said, gathering her purse with movements that were just a little too controlled. Call me when you're ready to discuss this rationally. After she left, Silas sat heavily in his chair, looking older than Harper had ever seen him. Harper, I owe you an apology. You believe me now? I should have believed you from the beginning. I'm sorry I let my personal feelings cloud my judgment. But Harper's victory felt hollow and incomplete. Something about Vanessa's too easy departure bothered her deeply. People who planned elaborate heists with sophisticated technology didn't usually give up so quickly when caught. Silas, she said carefully, trusting the instincts that had kept her safe through years of uncertainty, I don't think she's done. Harper was right to be worried. For 2 days, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Silas had changed the security codes and asked Samir to monitor all electronic activity, but Harper couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa wasn't finished. On Thursday night, Harper woke to the familiar sound of footsteps downstairs, but this time they were different, more confident, more purposeful. She crept to her window and looked down at the driveway. Vanessa's car was parked in the shadows beyond the main entrance, almost hidden by trees. Harper's stomach dropped. Vanessa was back, and she was being much more careful about not being seen. Moving as quietly as she could, Harper slipped out of her room and down the hallway. She could hear sounds from the library, not the careful whispers from before, but the confident movements of someone who had decided to stop sneaking around. Harper positioned herself at the top of the stairs, where she could see into the library. Vanessa was there, dressed in dark clothes, working with some kind of electronic device at the hidden door. As Harper watched, Vanessa descended into the underground room. A few moments later, Harper heard a series of electronic beeps followed by the unmistakable sound of metal clicking against metal. The chest was being opened. Harper ran to Silas's room and shook him awake. She's back, Harper whispered urgently. Vanessa's in the underground room right now. Silas was instantly alert. Are you sure? I saw her car. I heard the chest opening. Silas grabbed his phone and called the police, then Samir. We need to catch her in the act, he said grimly. They crept downstairs together, Silas carrying a flashlight. The library was empty, but the door to the underground room stood open. Voices drifted up from below. Vanessa was on her phone again, but now she sounded triumphant. I have it. The whole collection, letters, photographs, and something else. Looks like a confession of some kind. This is worth more than we thought. Vanessa, Silas said, his voice hard. She spun around, her beautiful face twisted with anger and desperation. Silas and the little spy. She looked at Harper with genuine hatred. You just couldn't leave it alone, could you? What are you stealing? Harper asked, surprised by her own boldness. Vanessa laughed bitterly. Stealing. This stuff has been rotting down here for decades. Your precious Bennett family never even knew it existed. How did you know about it? Silas demanded. My great-grandfather worked on this house in 1924. He knew about the secret room, about what the original owner hid down here. Vanessa's eyes were wild now. Documents that prove the Maddox family was cheated out of their inheritance. Letters that show how the Bennetts built their fortune on stolen land. Harper felt the world tilt. Mrs. Maddox? Not your Mrs. Maddox. Her family, generations ago. This proves they were the rightful owners of this property. Then why steal it? Silas asked. Why not bring it to court? Vanessa's laugh was bitter. Because courts favor rich families like yours, but private collectors pay very well for authentic historical scandals. Police sirens were getting louder. Vanessa's face went desperate. I'm not going to prison for you people, she snarled, pushing past them toward the stairs. But Harper had spent her whole life learning to be quick and resourceful. As Vanessa rushed past, Harper stuck out her foot. Vanessa tumbled, the metallic case flying from her hands and scattering its contents across the stone floor. Harper dove for the nearest document, rolling away as Vanessa lunged for her. Leave her alone. Silas shouted, but Harper was already scrambling up the stairs. By the time the police arrived, Harper was standing in the library, clutching a handful of yellowed papers, while Silas kept Vanessa from escaping. But as Harper looked at the documents in her hands, she realized something that made her stomach churn. These weren't just historical curiosities. They were death certificates, a suicide note, and photographs of what looked like a crime scene. The blood in the underground room wasn't from some long-ago accident. Someone had died down there, and someone else had hidden the evidence. Sometimes, the treasure hidden in old houses isn't gold or jewels. Sometimes, it's truth that someone was desperate to bury forever. The police had taken Vanessa away, but the documents she tried to steal lay spread across Silas's desk like pieces of a puzzle that no one wanted to solve. Mrs. Maddox sat in a chair across from him, her face pale as she studied papers that bore her family name. Harper perched on the window seat, watching the adults try to make sense of what they had discovered. Mr. Vernon had arrived an hour ago and stood rigid beside the fireplace, his usual composure completely shattered. Read it again, Mrs. Maddox said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Silas picked up the handwritten letter dated 1923. To whoever finds this record, I cannot live with what I have done. The Maddox family trusted me to handle the sale of their property fairly. But I conspired with the Bennett patriarch to cheat them out of their rightful inheritance. When young Thomas Maddox discovered my deception and threatened to expose us both, I lost my mind. In the struggle, he fell and struck his head. By the time I realized he was dead, Bennett had convinced me that our only option was to hide the truth. We buried Thomas in the foundation and destroyed all records of the Maddox family's claim to this land. I can no longer bear the weight of this secret. May God forgive us all. Herbert Crane, attorney. The room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Thomas Maddox was my great-great-uncle, Mrs. Maddox said finally. He disappeared in 1923. The family always wondered what happened to him. Harper hugged her knees to her chest. He was murdered. Accidentally, Mr. Vernon said quickly, but his voice lacked conviction. They still covered it up, Harper pointed out. They still buried him and stole from his family. Silas was staring at the death certificate, his face grave. This means the Maddox family are the rightful owners of this property. Mrs. Maddox looked up sharply. Mr. Bennet, I never asked. You shouldn't have to ask, Silas said firmly. This is your family's land. Harper watched the exchange with fascination. She'd expected anger, drama, legal battles. Instead, she was seeing something she'd rarely witnessed in her young life. Adults choosing to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. But what about you? Harper asked Silas. Where will we live? For the first time since they'd met, Silas smiled at her with complete, unguarded warmth. We'll figure that out together, as a family. Mr. Vernon cleared his throat. There are legal implications here, significant ones. Good, Silas said. Let's address them properly this time. Mrs. Maddox stood slowly, her 70 years seeming heavier now. Mr. Bennet, I've spent my entire adult life caring for this house and your family. I can't imagine wanting to live anywhere else. Then don't, Silas said simply. This place needs its true caretaker. Harper looked around the library, thinking about all the secrets the house had been carrying. What happens to the underground room? We seal it permanently, Mrs. Maddox said firmly. After we give Thomas a proper burial. And we make sure this story gets told correctly, Silas added. No more family secrets. Harper nodded. She thought about Vanessa, now facing charges for attempted theft and breaking and entering. Vanessa was wrong about the courts, wasn't she? She thought rich people always win. Sometimes they do, Silas admitted. But not this time. Mr. Vernon had been unusually quiet. Now he stepped forward, his stern face showing something Harper had never seen before, respect. Young lady, he said formally, I owe you an apology. Harper looked up at him warily. You saw truth where adults chose to see convenience. You spoke up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. He paused, seeming to struggle with words. That takes remarkable courage. I just listened, Harper said simply. No, Mr. Vernon said, settling into a chair beside her. You did much more than that. You dared to look straight at difficult truths. Very few people can do that. For the first time, his hand settled gently on her shoulder. Harper felt something she'd never experienced before, the warm weight of being truly believed, truly valued, truly part of something bigger than herself. So, we're really a family now, she asked Silas. We really are, he said. And this will always be our home, even if the name on the deed changes. Mrs. Maddox smiled through her tears. I think Harper's house sounds perfect. 6 months later, Harper sat in the library, now officially part of Maddox's house, reading aloud to Mrs. Maddox while Silas worked at his laptop nearby. The mirror was back on the wall, but now it reflected a family that had learned to face their shadows together. Thomas Maddox had been given a proper burial in the town cemetery, with a headstone that told the truth about his life and death. The underground room had been sealed, but not before historians had documented everything found there. The story had made national news: child uncovers century-old cover-up, millionaire returns stolen property. Harper had been interviewed by reporters, had her picture in newspapers, and received letters from children all over the country telling her about times adults hadn't believed them. But what mattered most to her was much simpler: she belonged somewhere. Mrs. Maddox still ran the house, but now as its rightful owner rather than its employee. Silas had purchased a smaller property nearby and split his time between managing his business and learning how to be a real father. And Harper had started a new school, where teachers listened when she spoke up. Mr. Vernon visited every Sunday for dinner, having discovered that he actually enjoyed the company of a child who wasn't afraid to challenge him. He'd become Harper's unexpected champion, supporting her when she raised her hand in school, when she questioned authority, when she insisted on being heard. Harper, Mrs. Maddox said as she closed the book they'd been reading, "Do you ever regret opening that door?" Harper considered the question seriously. The past 6 months had been complicated: court proceedings, media attention, difficult conversations about justice and family history. There had been moments when she'd wished she could go back to the simple days of just being a newly adopted daughter in a big, quiet house. "No," she said finally. "Secrets are too heavy for houses to carry alone." Silas looked up from his laptop. "And too heavy for children to carry alone." "I wasn't alone," Harper pointed out. "I had you and Mrs. Maddox and even Mr. Vernon, once he decided to listen." "You had us," Silas agreed. "But you still had to be brave enough to speak up first." Harper curled up in her favorite chair, looking around the library that had become the heart of their unusual family. The books still held their stories, but now the house itself had been allowed to tell its story, too. "Silas," she said sleepily. "Yes. When I grow up, I want to help other kids who know things adults don't want to hear." "I think that's exactly what the world needs," he said, closing his laptop and settling beside her. "Children who are brave enough to speak truth, and adults who are wise enough to listen." Outside, snow was beginning to fall, covering the grounds of Maddox's house in pristine white. Inside, a family that had been built from honesty and choice rather than blood and circumstance settled in for a quiet evening. Harper dozed against Silas's shoulder, listening to Mrs. Maddox's humming in the kitchen and Mr. Vernon's voice as he called to confirm his Sunday dinner plans. The house around them felt different now, lighter somehow, no longer burdened with secrets it had carried for nearly a century. As she drifted off to sleep, Harper thought about all the other children out there who might be listening to things adults didn't want to hear. She hoped they would remember that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important truths. And she hoped they would find the courage to whisper, then speak, then shout those truths until someone finally listened. Because secrets weren't meant to be carried alone. Truth wasn't meant to be hidden forever. And families, real families, were built by people brave enough to face whatever they found behind the mirrors of their lives. This story ends here, but the lesson continues wherever children dare to speak up, and adults choose to listen. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that truth-telling is the bravest thing anyone can do. Like this video if you believe children's voices matter. Subscribe for more stories about courage and justice. And comment with a time when you spoke up, even though you were scared. Because every voice matters, especially the smallest ones.